beneath the steel rails that stretch across Alberta lies a complicated and often overlooked history, one that connects Canada's railway expansion with the displacement and disruption of Indigenous life. This documentary explores how the construction and operation of Canadian railways, particularly through Treaty 7 territory in Alberta, impacted First Nations communities. It considers the ways differing perspectives on land ownership shaped negotiations, influenced policy, and continue to affect Indigenous settler relations in Canada today. The Canadian Pacific Railway was one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in Canadian history. It was also one of the most politically charged. The promise of a transcontinental railway was a condition of British Columbia joining Confederation in 1871. But to fulfill that promise, the federal government needed to secure massive swaths of land across the prairies and the Rocky Mountains. That land, of course, was not empty. In southern Alberta, much of the land targeted for railway development was part of Treaty 7 territory, home to the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Tsuut'ina Nation, among others. Treaty 7 was signed in 1877 under the assumption that both parties, Crown and Indigenous nations, would uphold their responsibilities. The First Nations understood the treaty as an agreement to share the land in a way that respected their sovereignty and way of life. The Crown, on the other hand, often treated treaties as a legal mechanism to facilitate colonization, resource extraction, and settlement. The difference in interpretation was profound, and it laid the groundwork for decades of disputes, broken promises, and land loss. Railway companies, with full support from the federal government, were granted significant authority over land use. Under Section 18 of the Indian Act, reserve land could be expropriated for public works, including railways, with or without the consent of the affected Indigenous communities. In many cases, the land was taken outright. In others, communities were pressured into surrender agreements that were neither fully explained nor fairly negotiated. Reserve land was reduced, divided, or permanently altered to accommodate railway infrastructure. This story is not just about land. It's about control and identity. For many First Nations, land is not a commodity. It is sacred. It is inherited through generations, tied to language, ceremony, and cultural survival. The settler colonial view, by contrast, saw land as a resource, something to be surveyed, divided, bought, and sold. This clash of worldviews made fair negotiation nearly impossible. Indigenous leaders who signed treaties and land surrender agreements were often working with an entirely different understanding of land stewardship, one that was ignored or misunderstood by Canadian officials and railway executives. Today, the tracks built through Treaty 7 territory still serve as vital arteries for commerce. The modern-day Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railway, or CPKC Rail, operates trains through reserve land as a part of its transcontinental network. The presence of these railways remains a visible symbol of Canada's development, but also of the legacy of expropriation. While some progress has been made towards reconciliation, many Indigenous communities continue to experience the consequences of decisions made without their full consent. Archival research from the Glenbow Archives in Calgary reveals detailed records of land surrenders that occurred under questionable circumstances. In several cases, railway construction forced the rerouting of rivers, the destruction of traditional sites, and the displacement of families. Interviewing a current CPKC rail employee, it became clear that while railways today acknowledge Indigenous concerns more than in the past, there are still gaps in knowledge and in accountability. Corporate initiatives focused on Indigenous relations exist, such as their Every Child Matters ES44AC locomotive in a full orange Liberty promotes historical awareness and ongoing collaboration. These efforts risk becoming symbolic rather than substantial without proper acknowledgement. Across Alberta, some Indigenous communities are asserting greater control over land use planning. Legal precedents now require that governments and corporations consult Indigenous groups before undertaking infrastructure projects that may impact their land or rights. While this is a step forward, consultation does not always equal consent, and communities continue to push for a more meaningful role in decision-making processes. Railways, pipelines, highways. These aren't just development projects, they're tests of Canada's commitment to reconciliation. And too often, they reveal how far we still have to go.
Grass, trees, and dew, how I hate you. Please turn the headlights around. Please turn the headlights around.
When passing through these landscapes today, it's easy to overlook the deeper story beneath the tracks. But the fact that trains continue to roll across reserve land should prompt important questions. What was given up for these lines to exist? Was it voluntary or forced? And have the communities affected by these developments ever been truly compensated? Despite the history, many Indigenous communities have found ways to reclaim power in the present. Some have formed agreements with rail companies that provide employment, investment, and cultural recognition. Others are fighting in court to address past injustices. These efforts show that reconciliation is not just about looking back. It's about building forward on terms that are equal, honest, and rooted in respect for Indigenous law, knowledge, and sovereignty. This project began with a simple curiosity. How did these tracks get here? But the answer was anything but simple. It revealed a complex and often painful history of land appropriation, miscommunication, and resilience. It's about what happens when two vastly different worldviews collide, and how that collision shapes the country we live in.